All right. Uh, Hello, everyone. I'm John Mosley Hayes, an epidemiologist at the Indian Health Service Division of Epidemiology and Disease Control. And today I'm going to give you an orientation to the materials that are inside what we call the Epidemiology Data Mart training package. My role in the Epidemiology Data Mart is multifaceted, but some of the main things that I do that you may have seen my name before are that I work with the tribal epidemiology centers to help people get authorized for access to the Epidemiology Data Mart. I'm also involved in generating and distributing the encrypted EDM, that's the acronym for the Epidemiology Data Mart, EDM, the EDM data sets that we send to the tribal epidemiology centers. In addition, I'm kind of a pinch hitter for any special projects that come up at the Division of Epidemiology and Disease Prevention, for example, Zika surveillance. I've also been working at becoming somewhat of a subject matter expert with the Epidemiology Data Mart by learning a lot from Dr. Larry Lane, who has been our main developer of the Epidemiology Data Mart, and I have been assisting him on developing these materials along with Lisa Neal, who is the program officer for the Tribal Epidemiology Center program, which is hosted within the Division of Epidemiology and Disease Prevention. Okay, so that's a little introduction about me and where I fit in, but again, the reason for this, what we are calling a EDM training DEDP office hour, or office hours, is that today I'm going to give you an orientation to the materials that are in what we call the EDM training package. And so all of you should have received an email from me that are on the call today, because I use the same distribution list. This particular file that I'm highlighting on the screen right now, called the EDM training package V1. And the V1 is important because this is just version 1. There are a caveat is that these materials are going to be continually updated and new materials added to it, to this training package as appropriate and as we can support. So this is where we are right now, and these are the training materials that we've sent out to all of you, and we hope that you'll find the materials helpful. And after I go through the orientation, I'm going to open it up for some Q&A, where we'll do our best to answer any questions that you might have about the Epidemiology Data Mart, and also to do some brainstorming about how, hear your input on how the Division of Epidemiology and Disease Prevention can do a better job of supporting your EDM data use needs. So that's what we're going to do today. And right now, I'm going to focus just on giving you a quick orientation to the materials. So there are 4 folders within that zip file that I sent out to you. The first folder is the EDM Training Modules Table of Contents. The next folder is Module 1, GDM EDM Data Workflow. A third folder is Module 2, GDM EDM Data Structures. And a third folder, and the final one, is Module 3, counting patients and creating denominators. So let's open up the table of contents. And that'll be a guide as I blast through these materials. I certainly am not going to go into any depth on anything, but I will try to click on the particular file, display it on my computer screen so you can see it, maybe make a few comments about that particular file or material that we've provided you. So the table of contents shows you that under the folder called Module 1, these are the materials that it contains. Similarly, in the folder called Module 2, these are the materials that it contains. And lastly, the folder called Module 3, these are the materials that it contains. I'm going to minimize that, and we're going to start opening up these documents. So in Module 1, we have 4 files that we provided you. Do I have a question from the audience? No. Okay. Module 1, GDM and EDM data workflow. This is a PDF document, and within it goes over concepts that are covered in this executive summary, the EDM executive summary PDF document, as well as a PowerPoint called the NDW 101 PowerPoint. And throughout this module 1, as well as with the other modules 2 and 3 at this point that we provided you, the references are made to this particular document that is put out by the National Patient Information Reporting System staff. They've developed this document here, and it's a good reference document. And why it's a good reference document is explained in Module 1, GDM and EDM data workflow. So now we'll open those up for you. So here's that PDF document. And this is just getting into giving you the basics about, where does the epidemiology data Mart data come from. It also gives you kind of an overview of what is not in any great depth, but it does explain the differences between the terms the National Data Warehouse, the General Data Warehouse, Data Mart, General Data Mart, and the Epidemiology Data Mart. So it gives you kind of a really light overview of that, the differences between these 3 different words that are thrown out there often. I will say a take-home message is that if you have access to the Epidemiology Data Mart, then you have access pretty much to the National Data Warehouse. So the Epidemiology Data Mart is downstream from what we call the National Data Warehouse. The Epidemiology Data Mart is conceptually, it's a subset of the National Data Warehouse. Okay, but I'm not going to get into lots of details. Like I said, this is just an orientation to the materials. So Module 1, GDM and EDM data workflow, is a 4-page document, and it gives you some of the very basics about what is the EDM, what is the GDM. Okay, I'm going to close that up for now. The executive summary, another PDF document, summarizes the information that's in that first module, Module 1. And we also consider that this document itself is kind of part of Module 1, just to clarify that. But there is a second ago I was showing you the document, the main document, the beginning document for what we consider Module 1. This is another one of the files that is contained in the folder identified as Module 1. The name of the document is the Epidemiology Data Mart Executive Summary. So this would be a good document for your leadership, for people that aren't necessarily going to be working with the EDM data. But at the same token, this is a great place for a person that is going to be working with the EDM data to go over some important concepts. Even though it's a one-pager in terms of text, it summarizes things right here. Then it gives you a diagram. A second ago, I started getting into some of the details about how the epicenter, the Epidata Mart, is a subset of the National Data Warehouse. As far as one way of looking at it. So you have that little diagram there. Shows where the data comes from. All the data in the Epidemiology Data Mart right now comes from the Indian Health Service or tribally run or urban run health facilities. An acronym for them is ITU. That's explained in some of the documentation in Module 1 that I showed on the screen earlier. And also in the executive summary, you get some visuals showing you what are the data tables that are in one of the groupings. We call the groupings of tables schema. And so under the red schema, this diagram, it shows you what are the names of the data tables that are in that particular, in the red schema. Similarly, these are the names of the data tables that are in the encounters schema. So the patient visit information, the tables that hold the patient information, patient visit information, excuse me, whereas these tables up here under reg or registration tables hold the information about the patients that has to do with like their demographic information, their gender, their age, where their residence is, what clinic are they associated with. That information is in here. And then there are many data tables that make up the group known as the reference tables. So under the ref schema, you have all of these tables. And so they're like a legend, if you would. If you open up, say, the clinical measures table, there will be some variables that will rely on the information that's laid out in this reference table called clinical measure. So there's a little more detail for you, and we're still just in the executive summary. This lists the variables that are removed from the general data mart to make the Tribal Epidemiology Center limited data version of the Epidemiology Data Mart, what we call a limited data set. So this table pinpoints what are the variables that are removed from the general data mart in the process of creating the version of the Epidemiology Data Mart, the EDM, that we give to the Tribal Epidemiology Centers. So that's what this table is. Okay, and then on the last page of the executive summary, it gives you some important points that are covered both in the written, covered in the PDF document that I opened at the beginning of the session. I can show that on the screen again. I won't. So there's again, there's 4 files in Module 1, and these 15 key points about the EDM are covered in three of those files, as well as in some of the documentation provided by the NIPERS program, that reference document that I mentioned at the beginning. So this is just the executive summary, and it ends up with these 15 key points about the EDM. Okay. Here's the PowerPoint. I've already got it open here, I believe. There's a PowerPoint that we developed. Again, Dr. Lane is the primary author, and then I assist him with developing these materials. So we created this PowerPoint presentation to give leadership an overview about what is the National Data Warehouse and how does it relate to the Epidemiology Data Mart. And that's what this presentation's about. You could use it for your own purposes. It's just up to you. If we have time, we're going to create a video where we go over these slides as well, and you could just watch that video if you want. So there's this presentation. It covers basic concepts about the Epidemiology Data Mart. And it gets into two main things. It helps explain the differences between the National Data Warehouse, the General Data Mart, and the Epidemiology Data Mart. And then it has a second section where it gives some visualization to help you better understand how to count unique patients, how to identify them, and ways of counting them. So that's what this PowerPoint gets into. All right, and then the last document in the module 1 is the NIPERS Basic Business Rules. And as explained in some of the documents that I've already shown you, it's recommended that you have a copy of this that you can reference, because it really gets into a lot of the nitty-gritty about how things can be counted, how populations can be identified in the EDM. Gets into unduplicating records. It gets into explaining some important flags, variables that can be used as flags to identify subsets of records. All of that is covered in this particular reference document. Okay. And I will say that our strategy at the Division of Epidemiology and Disease Prevention is that we don't want to recreate the wheel. So in terms of the documentation, the metadata about the National Data Warehouse, and within it there's a data mart called the General Data Mart, and it holds patient registration information, and it holds medical visit information. And what our strategy is that because the Epidemiology Data Mart is just primarily a copying of the General Data Mart, and that's explained in the documentation that you've received, we can rely on a lot of the documentation that's already out there about the National Data Warehouse and the General Data Mart. So that's a point that I wanted to bring up with you, and it's the links to where to go on the web to get at that information. That's provided in Module 1. Okay. And in one of the documents that's downloaded from the website is NIPERS Basic Business Rules. And there are other documents that you could download, or you can just look at them online. It's up to you. And I can get into that later if you want. But let me go back into the next module, since we've now covered module 1 and the materials that are in it. We're going to go to module 2, and we're going to cover the materials that are in what we are calling module 2, GDM EDM data structures. So inside this folder, you will find all of these files. And now I'm going to continue to walk you through them. So your main document here is Module 2 GDM EDM data structures. And this document gets into explaining how the GDM and the EDM are structured so that you can begin to identify unique patients and count unique patients that meet a variety of health event characteristics of interest. But first you've got to understand how the data is structured so that you can then do that eventually. And so in our documents, when we get into talking about data tables, the variables or fields that are in those data tables, where the tables are located in terms of schema or groups of data tables, we have a little legend here, and we'll modify some of the text in this document based on this legend. So that's what this paragraph does, and you'll see this paragraph in some of the other module written documentation as well. So that's something I was keying you in on that I forgot to mention earlier, or that I don't, yeah. And so you'll see this, you'll see a repeat of this information in some upcoming modules. But this particular module gets at that data structure, but it only lightly touches on some of the differences between the GDM and the EDM to get in more depth about the differences between the EDM and the GDM. That really is covered more in module 3, especially in this document, which is in module 3, which is called module 3D EDM tables. But right now we're looking at the first main document in module 2, which is called GDM EDM data structures, and that's what this document does for you. Starts off by making sure that we're all using the same terms when we talk about data tables, the variables that are in the tables, what a record is, and then this concept of table resolution. It explains it right here. And then we begin to show in this module how the data is structured. Here's a diagram. Here we're looking at that registration schema. These are the data tables that are related to defining demographic information about a particular patient. So this is, you get a visual of it in figure 1 in this particular module write-up. Module 2, GDM, EDM data structures. Here we go into explaining information in these 3 tables, just to begin to show how you have to relate the information in patient registration and the demographic table. You have to relate that back and store information that's in these tables in the user pop table depending on the version of the user pop. And that's all explained in detail in these materials. A real important concept is primary keys and foreign keys. and that's a concept that's it's not based on the EDM, it's based on relational databases. And so you have to understand some of the basic concepts of relational databases to properly work with the EDM. And within that framework of concepts under the relational database construct, there are these terms, primary and foreign keys. So that's touched upon here.
Dr. Mosley?
Hayes, but that's okay. Hey, what can I do
Hi.
for you?
Do the materials go into further explanation of how to do a relational database, or is it just touched on?
No, our materials do go into that. As I'll show you. One of the files that's in Module 2 is a PowerPoint that we constructed from materials from various places that explains what is a relational database. And I'll get to that in this orientation. I'll open this up for you. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Make sure I get everything up the way I want it. We were going over this module 2, and again, a folder that we call module 2 has a collection of files in it, and this is one of those files. But in the title of this particular file, we're calling, this document is called Module 2 GDM EDM Data Structures. We go into some of the important variables in this section of this 12-page document. One of the files that we include in Module 2 is called Module 2A Joining Tables, and it goes into detail about how do you join tables. So in a way that's all tied up with understanding relational databases as well. So in this document, Module 2 GDM EDM, we reference this other document, which is called Module 2A Joining Tables. And there's even a PowerPoint that you can click on that will kind of animates how you join tables. For those of you that are already familiar with how to join tables correctly, then you can just skip this material if you wanted to. But it's there to help. And I found it very helpful a couple of years ago when I started trying to learn about the EDM. I found these materials helpful, and these are improved versions of the materials that I used previously and worked with Dr. Lane on developing. So I hope that you'll take advantage of them as well. Here again, it talks about how some of the special differences between the EDM and the GDM, they're pinpointed in this document here in Module 3. Here, this very important concept about how the data can be subsetted based on IHS administrative areas is done, to key you in on that. And so for a tribal epidemiology center, you match up the records that you're going to receive in your EDM limited database are going to be subsetted based on these administrative areas. So, for example, the California area, the CAO acronym that I'm highlighting here, that stands for the California Area Office. All the records that we send the California Epicenter are just records that are of patients that information was generated about them within the California Area Office catchment area. And there's a variable inside the database that allows you to subset on this value. So this is an example of that right there. So in the program that you write, you would use a statement like this to subset the records that are inside the epidemiology data mart just to the California area, to those records that have this value for this particular variable, the region abbreviation code variable. I'm just giving you an overview here. Notice how in this particular document we say, hey, look on page 3 of the NIPR's Basic Business Rules. You click on that, it hyperlinks to the document that I was showing you earlier under Module 1. So we often, in these materials, will refer you to this particular document that's put out by the National Patient Information and Reporting System staff. It's put out of that particular program and not us. Here we lay out this very important concept that if you're going to count or identify unique patients, you can only do that utilizing these two variables, either the integrity ID variable or the static integrity ID variable. So this module begins to explain that, where the values for those variables comes from, and it begins to put everything in a perspective that you'll be able to identify unique patients as well as count unique patients using these variables in your computer programming. Here in this particular module, a nice thing is the data dictionary online resources. I can just click on the link to show you, make it easier on me to do it. So I think that should come up here. There it is. So this is the actual website that you can go to, and for those of you that want metadata about the epidemiology data mart, you can see here that at least for the registration tables and the encounter tables, you can insert right here, you can type in a variable name. Let's go with integrity ID and see what happens. Here, that variable comes up, and we were in the, so this gives you definition about that particular variable, and if you click on the variable, it'll tell you where it's located, what table it's located in. In this case, the integrity ID within the GDM structure, not the EDM structure, but the GDM structure, is only located in the user pop table. Okay, so I'm going to get out of there, but the only point I was trying to make here was that inside the document I had open earlier, right here, the document Module 2, GDM, EDM, data structures, we give you information about how you can go and get at some of the metadata about the epidemiology data mart, relying on information that's already been put out there by the Indian Health Service outside of the Division of Epidemiology. We don't create that website that I was showing you, nor do we maintain it, but we certainly recommend that you utilize it as you're trying to understand the structure of the EDM. It can be very helpful. Okay, so here's a diagram about the encounters tables, where the patient visit information is stored. This is a diagram that shows you the names of all the different data tables, and that's here in black, in bold black font, and then underneath here, these list all the different variables that are in this particular data table. Here we're showing how you relate information from one table to another. In this case, reg ID is the variable, primary key, that we're going to link over to the foreign key that is in the encounters table. So that's what this diagram shows you. And we finish up this module by giving you a visualization of how you can reduce the records that exist in the EDM to answer your questions. So it's not computer code, it's just a diagram to show you what happens from the computer code that you might write to work with the EDM data. So that's what this diagram shows you, how to decrease the records and answer your questions. Okay, so that ends module 2. I will mention, we have the statement in here, as you will see in modules 4, counting rate calculation examples, adding integrity ID and static integrity ID to the encounters table in the EDM will reduce a lot of processing time. We haven't provided you module 4 yet, but our intent is to do that in the future when we complete it. So, I'm going to get out of here now and show you the next document. All this is a spreadsheet that was used is referenced in it's the raw data, if you will, right here. In case you want to, those of you that might want some raw data to experiment with some of the concepts that are laid out in this module, or this module right here called Module 2A, Joining Tables. That's what the spreadsheet does for you. You can get that information that you would need to then create using this particular program. This is a computer program. It will utilize information in this Excel spreadsheet to do some of the things that are laid out in this table, this PowerPoint right here. Let's see if it'll come up. Yes, this is just a PowerPoint to show you how you can put tables together, and it actually has some embedded stuff. So if I was to put it in presentation mode, let's see here, will that work? Yeah, you can just click the keys and some of the things that have been programmed into this PowerPoint presentation will come in. That's kind of cool. You may find it helpful. So it is a visualization of how to join tables in a PowerPoint presentation. That's what this one is, which is a file that falls under your folder, which is called Module 2 GDM EDM Data Structures. And there's this other module called Module 2A Joining Tables, and within it, it'll reference that PowerPoint that I was just showing you, and to do some of the code that is shown in this particular module. This is actual code that you would put in a SAS session to join tables. We're showing you two ways of doing it. One way is not using proc SQL language, which is up here, and just rely on your standard data steps for joining tables, which is here. But for those of you that like to do that using proc SQL, we give some example code in this module as well on how to do that. These are some schematics to show you how tables can be joined together. Okay, I think that's enough on that for now. Other than to say that in this PDF file, it's utilizing concepts that are laid out in this PowerPoint table join animation. It's also utilizing this SAS program. I'll show it to you. Pull that up. Right here. So I'm actually in a SAS session now, and I've pulled up the program that was used to read the data that was in that Excel file that I showed you earlier. And once you've done all of that, then this code walks you through in a program how to do an inner join, how to do a left join, and a left join and a right join are basically the same thing. So this is an inner join, this is a left join with 2 tables, this is a left join with 3 tables. It's a very short program, but as you move forward and working with the EDM data, having this example code you may find useful. And the concepts in this module 2A joining table SAS program are covered in that PDF document that I had opened a second ago, which I've reopened here for you. Not this one, but the, excuse me, it's this document, this PDF document right here. Okay, so all about joining tables is covered in this document, this PDF document. If you want, you can look at the actual code that's written to join tables, which is in this SAS program that I was showing you a second ago. This is the actual raw data that this SAS program needs to run correctly. This is an animation of joining tables. And then at the very last, going back to that question that Ms. Neal gave earlier, here's a PowerPoint to go over what is a relational database. So it's a short presentation. It's 10 slides. The notes you may find useful. Most of the information that's on the slide is in the notes. But in a case like this, you get some more details down here in the notes that you wouldn't see on the slide itself. But it goes over the concepts of what is a relational database, and that's pertinent to how do you properly join tables to answer questions in the EDM. Okay. So those are all the materials that are covered in the Module 2 GDM EDM Data Structure folder. There is a third folder, Module 3, and in that folder, Module 3, Counting Patients and Creating Denominators, the main document is this one, which is Module 3, Counting Patients, a PDF document. Right here. And that's what this document's about. It's trying to get the EDM user to understand the proper way to identify patients, and that involves unduplication, deduplication of you'll have like a group of records, and each of those records let me try to say it differently. You, in the EDM, you will find at times that you'll have maybe 20 records that are about the same person, but if you want to count that person, you only need to count them one time. So you have to come up with a process of removing the 19 other records to make your count. And you also have to have the logic down so that you don't lose information that you want to know about that person as well. So this module gets into the process of counting patients within the EDM. And it's a 15-page document, and towards the end of it, it begins, it is pointing out different ways of counting patients, some different ways that we do that in the Indian Health Service. And it's important that you understand these different ways of counting patients and making groups of patients, because it will greatly impact the counts and rate calculations that you may decide to share as you work with the EDM data. And for example, the national program, National Patient Information Reporting System, has a way of defining a group of patients that have information recorded in the National Data Warehouse, and therefore that information gets into the epidemiology data mart. And because of the logic and programs that have been written, you can take advantage of that. This is explained in this section of this document. So the NIPERS user population, NIPERS logic generated user population, but then there's a different way of doing that as well, and some of that is gotten into as well with the clinical reporting system. So I'm not going to give you an overview about what is a clinical reporting system, or what the NIPERS program is, or about these different ways of counting patients, but I wanted to key you in that in Module 3, Counting Patients, it covers many of the important concepts that are related to how do you count patients, how do you create populations that meet certain criteria to then do your counting within that group of patients. So that is covered in Module 3, and Module 3 also references two SAS programs. One of them is Module 3B, NIPERS, CAIR counts. That stands for Countable Active Indian Registrants, the CAR, and then CIR stands for Countable Indian Registrants. So this is a SAS program that shows you how to subset the EDM information into these different types of groups. This program that I've highlighted, Module 3C, CRS, user, so that stands for a Clinical Reporting System, CRS, user. ACU stands for Active Countable User Count, Active Countable User, is another program that applies a different logic for counting patients, for subsetting the EDM records. So you can then count patients, or then make some rate calculations. So that's covered in, this is a program that you can use to do that if you want to use it in your own programs, computer programs. And there's a reference that's made in Module 3, Counting Patients, to this pictorial, Module 3A, Pictorial User Process. I'm going to open that up. So it's a pictorial that shows you how the counting process. And you know, I'm trying not to get into a lot of specifics, but basically an individual can be registered at more than one health facility, and registration numbers at the health facility are unique to a particular individual. So each individual that's registered at a particular health clinic will have a unique registration ID. But when if you're a patient that's registered at one clinic and then you go somewhere else and register at a different clinic, then the same person can have two different registration ID values. And so this diagram gets into that and helps show you how you would deduplicate so that you can make a count that represents each count represents a unique person. Okay, that's what this little diagram does for you. All right, and here, this spreadsheet, which is in the Module 3 folder, is really just it's to lay out for the EDM user to get a better sense of what the official counts are for this particular user pop version for these different areas, as well as IHS as a whole, so that you could apply your own logic to identify patients and then see how close it gets to these figures that are generated by the Division of Program Statistics, which is a separate division from us. But the reason we provide you this information is that it relates to the module that I was showing you earlier, the Module 3. This is part of Module 3, but the PDF document that, let's see, counting patients, that spreadsheet that I have open is incorporated into this module, and it's referred to. So you can utilize that spreadsheet to see how well your program is doing in terms of generating counts for a particular type of population, as well as to help illustrate some of the concepts that are laid out in Module 3, counting patients. So that's what this spreadsheet is for. Okay. And the last thing in Module 3 that I wanted to orient you to is this one, which is called this file, which is in the Module 3 folder. Excuse me. And this write-up is called Module 3D EDM Tables, Enhancements to GDM Tables. And what it does is it really goes into much greater detail than in the previous modules about what are the differences between the EDM, the Epidemiology Data Mart, and the GDM, the General Data Mart. Okay. So this one is a 5-page document. And I'm going to close that up. And to wrap things up on this orientation, what I have done is I have walked you through the materials that the Division of Epidemiology and Disease Prevention has produced for what we call the Epidemiology Data Mart training package. There are some additional there are some additional materials that we're going to be getting out there to you once they're ready. One is that I see a little typo here, sorry, because I've already sent this all out to you, but it's just to put a space right there between secure and IHS. But anyway, what I wanted to mention was that these materials that you see here under these materials, these folders, as well as what are in them, are going to be made available on an IHS website. So that's one of the things I want to key you in on. Let me bring that document back up. So I'm wrapping things up on the orientation to the Epidemiology Data Mart training package. And one thing I want to say is please, for those of you that have had no exposure to this material, please follow in sequence, ideally, but that's not always going to be the case, because you're going to be referring to things as you go through this as well. But in general, following this sequence, we suggest like you start off by reading the EDM executive summary document. Then you go through the EDM 101 PowerPoint. Then you read the Module 1 GDM and EDM data workflow PDF document. That would be the order so that we recommend you would go through these materials. So this table of contents, in a way, is a recommended learning path, if you would. So follow this sequence as you go through these materials. And please note that on an ongoing basis, we'll be updating these materials or adding to these materials. What I alluded, which I mentioned already, we're going to be putting at least the materials that are shown in the table of contents. We're going to put those on our an IHS website. Also, as we complete videos, they'll be available as well through that IHS website. And for those of you that are on the call today, or you know other people that weren't able to make it, you know, you are authorized EDM users. And so if you're an authorized EDM user and you're interested in learning about the EDM or sharing how to use the EDM, because we would like to see greater collaboration and sharing of experiences centered around utilizing the EDM, you know, sharing those experiences with one another. We have some EDM users here at the Division of Epidemiology and Disease Prevention, but they're very few. Larry Lane is our primary expert. He's a biostatistician, and Bernice is another biostatistician that we have, and both of them are excellent SAS computer programmers. And then there's me, and I am not an expert SAS programmer, but I do know how to do some SAS programming, and I am working with the EDM data. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we only have a few people on our staff that are actually working with the data within using SAS programming language. But we believe that at the TECs, there are more and more people. Roughly right now, there are 50 authorized users at the TEC, and it would be great if we could somehow nurture and foster greater sharing of our experiences as we work with the EDM data. And if you're one of the people that didn't receive my recent emails, and you're an authorized EDM user and you'd like to be on our distribution list, please send me an email and I'll put you on Okay, so that's the orientation to our current package. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, are there any further training opportunities or resources, and how do we get access to the website you mentioned?
Okay, thank you for those great questions. Uh, there will be some additional opportunities for training. Um, in DEDP, we're working that out, but a tentative proposal is that at least myself, I would make myself available to answer a regular office hour, so that each month I would be present to answer questions as they evolve. When we will also be making more formal presentations of some of the materials that we've created when that seems helpful. We have a rather large collection of videos that were done when previously Dr. Lane had put on. They were roughly, each session was about 2 hours long, and he put them together over maybe a 3 or 4 day period. So you had 3 or 4 days back to back where you had sessions where he went through the materials that I quickly walked you through and answered questions as they came up, and we recorded all that material. However, the EDM is changing, and so some of the material that was recorded previously may not be correct anymore, or may not show what we hope is a more efficient way of working with the data based on some of the restructuring of the EDM data that we've done. It's kind of a reconfiguration of the GDM data. So I guess my point is, Ms. Nill, is that we're going to be what we have distributed out there right now is our current EDM training package, but we're going to be adding to it or modifying it in time. And when we come up with new material, we'll be updating that on the IHS website. And that's your second question, is you want to know how do you get access to that IHS website. And what I'm going to do is I'll be sending out an email, or somebody on the DEDP team will be sending out an email to the EDM user group with instructions on how to get access to that website. So we'll be posting new materials or updated materials on that website. We will be sending you an email that explains how to get onto that website. And if we have, what I envision is at least once a year, around the time where we're trying to do all the renewals for people that are authorized to have access to the EDM, that I'll also be sending out a zip file that has the latest and greatest version of our training materials. It may be structured very similar to this. It will be, but maybe up here it'll say version 2. So, did that answer your questions? I feel like I'm rambling
Yes.
now.
No, thank you.
Okay.
You did.
All right, thank you. Let me go ahead and bring this to a close. We're at 1 hour and 3 minutes.